it's Kate here at Marvelous Videos. Today we look at An American Werewolf, the movie franchise explored. Imagine the influence of An American Werewolf in London that gets you in a pub in New York. Totally influenced by the imaginary pub of the classic film by John Landis, Slaughtered Lamb Pub proves that even after 35 years, fans of the horror genre can't shake off the imaginary creature from their minds. Released in August 1981, An American Werewolf in London is written and directed by John Landis, although he had finished the screenplay more than a decade ago. The noteworthy fact is the financiers thought that Landis' script was too frightening to be a comedy story and too humorous to be a horror film. Only after the success of his comedies like the Kentucky Fried Movie, National Lampoon's Animal House, and The Blue Brothers was he able to procure the finances from Polygram Pictures to produce his film An American Werewolf in London. The film was an instant success, bagging the award for the best horror film at the Saturn Awards in 1981. The stunning prosthetic makeup of the film earned the Academy Award for makeup effects for Rick Baker and inspired Michael Jackson for his all-time hit Thriller music video. The classic story follows two American college students, Jack and David, who went travelling and trekking in England and are attacked by a werewolf. Will David survive or get transformed into a werewolf by the time of the next full moon? I'm sure you already know about the movie because the iconic transformation of David from human to werewolf is so brilliant in the pre-digital era that the audience is awestruck with the bone-crushing realistic transformation. The main characters are portrayed by David Naughton, Jenny Agutter, Griffin Dunne, and John Woodvine. There is a sequel to the film titled An American Werewolf in Paris, directed by Anthony Waller in 1997, starring Tom Everett Scott, Julie Delpy, Vince Vieluf, Phil Buckman, and many others. Let us explore the transformation of an American student into a werewolf in London. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. Beware of the Moon, An American Werewolf in London, released in 1981. David Kessler and Jack Goodman were two American backpackers from New York, hiking through the Yorkshire moors in North England. They took a ride from a sheep herder who dropped them on a deserted road and warned them to avoid the moors. As the two men entered the pub, the Slaughtered Lamb, the locals coldly welcomed them. As Jack inquired about the pentagram painted on the wall, the locals became more unfriendly as they were sent away, not before issuing a warning to stay on the road and avoid the moors, just like the sheep herder had already warned them to do.
Beware the moon.
Yeah, I know, Jack. Come on, I'm freezing.
The two men followed the road, but due to the rain and fog getting denser, they were disorientated and landed in the moors. Alarmed with the menacing baying of fierce animals, they decided to retreat to the village. As they tried to go back, David stumbled and fell. As Jack tried to help David, a werewolf suddenly jumped from the fog and killed him. The werewolf also attacked and scratched David. But fortunately, he was saved as the locals from the pub fired gunshots and killed the werewolf. Before losing consciousness, David just managed to see the proper human form of the werewolf, lying naked and blood-covered beside him. As David was recovering in the St. Martin's Hospital in London, Dr. Hirsch informed him about Jack's death. He was also visited by the police and representatives from the American consulate, who inquired about the horrifying incident that had occurred. After investigating the locals, they concluded that David and Jack were attacked by an escaped lunatic. But David kept insisting that a powerful, fierce animal had attacked them.
Fell and Jack went to help me up, and this thing came from nowhere.
Soon, David started experiencing terrible nightmares where he saw monsters and demons. Sometimes he dreamt of himself running through the forest. In his difficult times, David was looked after by a caring nurse, Alex, who started liking him and spent plenty of time with him. The following morning, David encountered Jack's ghost, who warned him that a werewolf had attacked them, and David would soon be transformed into a werewolf on the next full moon. The werewolf's curse would continue unless David killed himself and discontinued the bloodline, or else he would continue hurting more people like the previous werewolf. David discarded the entire incident as a post-traumatic experience. After getting discharged from the hospital, David stayed at Alex's apartment. In the meantime, Dr. Hirsch, who was suspicious about the injuries sustained by David, went back to the Slaughtered Lamb and started inquiring, but no one told him anything except one man who hinted on the werewolf fact.
It's almost full moon. You change.
The next afternoon, Alex left for work as David was bored, sitting alone in the apartment. As soon as the full moon shone in the sky, David started screaming. His body was burning as he tore off his clothes and underwent the painful transformation to convert into a werewolf.
I didn't mean to call you.
Eventually, David began to slaughter innocent people all over the city. He opened his eyes in the morning and found himself in a wolves enclosure of London Zoo, lying naked without any memory of the previous night. He stole some balloons from a child to cover himself and later got hold of a woman's coat and went back to Alex's apartment. Dr. Hirsch learned everything from Alex and asked her to bring David to the hospital immediately. As they drove in the taxi, David realized the massacre he had caused the previous night, and also believed whatever Jack had said to him. Suffering from a panic attack, David stopped the cab and tried to run off, while Alex tried in vain to console him. He tried hard to get himself arrested by confessing the murders and making obscene gestures, but the policemen were not interested. That evening, David again encountered Jack's ghost in front of an adult theatre. His face had decomposed to a great extent. Later, Griffin Dunne, playing Jack, confessed that he was worried how his ill mother would react on seeing him like that, and indeed, she was disturbed with his decaying face. Inside the theatre, he met the ghosts of the 6 people he had killed, and Jack once more tried to convince him to kill himself. Once again, David transformed into a werewolf as he started his rampage inside the theatre. The police arrived at the spot and closed the main gate as more and more people started flocking in, and other police forces also started arriving. But the werewolf burst through the closed gate and tore apart Inspector Villiers' head. Chaos and panic broke out on the streets of Piccadilly Circus as cars smashed onto one another, killing and injuring more people. As Dr. Hirsch heard the news report, he informed Alex, as they both suspected that the werewolf was none other than David. On reaching, they found the police had cordoned the road to trap the animal. Alex broke through the barricade and saw the werewolf, which she knew was David. With tears in her eyes, she told David that she loved him, while the police shot him dead. Alex stood there heartbroken as the lifeless body of David lay naked on the road. It was heard that many people went to the theatres thinking An American Werewolf in London was a comedy, but after witnessing the horror, they ran out of the theatre. Michael Jackson grew so fond of the film that he decided to hire the team responsible for this movie for his music video of Thriller. And one more time, John Landis was successful in producing an iconic video of all time. This film too is an all-time classic not bound within its time limits. After 40 years, no one can say that this is not a film of the modern age. No offense to CGI, but the effort, hard work, efficiency, and precision of artists of the pre-CGI era is no less than the efforts of the computer. Rick Baker was disappointed that months of effort had lasted for only 7 seconds in the film, but the applause from the audience during those 7 seconds made him more than happy. The film blends the laughs and the screams while paving the way for a new kind of thrill, as seen in The Lost Boys, Fright Night, Cabin in the Woods, and many more. The comedy and horror, though, camouflaged the tragedy of young David's death. Jenny Agutter, as Alex, almost turned down the role, as she was not interested in horror films, but later she was happy to be a part of the cult classic. The film touches all the chords of emotion and creates an everlasting symphony that has impacted horror fans for decades. Things are about to get a little hairy. An American Werewolf in Paris, released in 1997. Moving from London to Paris, this film commenced on a rainy night in Paris, where an unknown being killed a petrified man. Andy, Brad, and Chris were on their way to Paris on holiday. Andy, unlike his friends, was a romantic guy who believed in true love. The 3 friends climbed up the Eiffel Tower as Andy planned to bungee jump from the top. But before he jumped, he found a beautiful girl, Serafini, who was planning to commit suicide.
No, don't!
As she plunged from the top, Andy bungee jumped and saved her in the nick of time, as she gently fell on the ground while Andy bounced back to the top. In the process, he hurt his head and woke up in the hospital with one shoe of Serafini's in his hand. Like the prince in Cinderella, he desperately started looking for the girl. They finally managed to trace Serafini's residence, and no matter how much Andy tried to get close to Serafini, she kept aloof from Andy. Andy wouldn't possibly know that Serafini was the werewolf daughter of Alex and David. One night, as the three friends visited Serafini's home, they were greeted by Claude, who invited them to a full moon charity party at Club de la Lune.
Come to our charity full moon party. It's for a good cause.
They should never have trusted a stranger, but the group reached the venue of the party and felt uncanny about the atmosphere. Serafini was not there. So, Chris searched for Serafini and he found her locked in a cage inside her house. As he told her about the party, she instantly knew that Andy was in trouble, as Claude was the leader of the Werewolf Society, who lured guests only to kill them. She went out, locked Chris in the cage instead, and hurried to save Andy. She managed to push Andy outside the wall of the club, but as she and the club members changed into werewolves, Brad was killed along with the other guests of the club. As Andy tried to get outside the club, he was attacked by a werewolf, but somehow he struggled and managed to jump outside the club walls and fainted. On waking up, he found himself at Serafini's house. She was blending human hearts and preparing a juice. Serafini tried to convince Andy that a werewolf had bitten him, and he was transforming into one. At first, Andy thought everything was a joke, but when he saw the decomposing ghost of Serafini's mother, Alex, he jumped out the window and escaped. Chris, hiding in the bush, tried to reach out to Andy but was grabbed by Claude. Andy reached Club de la Lune where police were clearing the massacre. Andy was devastated when they recovered Brad's dead body. Soon, Andy started growing restless and developed an appetite for raw meat. He met another American tourist, Amy, and started dating her. But Brad's ghost appeared and explained to Andy about his transformation into a werewolf. For Andy to become normal again, Brad said he would have to eat the heart of the werewolf that had bitten him, while Brad would be free only after the werewolf that had killed him would be slaughtered. Soon, Andy transformed into a werewolf as predicted, killing Amy and the policeman following him in his suspicion of his participation in the club massacre. Andy was arrested but managed to escape, helped by the ghosts of Brad and Amy. Andy was kidnapped by Claude and his gang, asking him to join their werewolf society, but he was supposed to murder Chris to prove his loyalty. Andy refused to kill Chris. The enraged mob attacked Andy, but Serafini saved him as they arrived at a lab where Serafini's stepfather was on life support. Serafini explained her stepfather was trying to prepare a serum that would control the werewolf transformation, but instead the drug proved to transform the werewolves to beast form instantly after consumption of the drug. Serafini confessed that she had killed her mother and savaged her father. That is why she was trying to take her life by jumping off the Eiffel Tower. Soon, Andy and Serafini realised that Claude and his group had killed her father, stolen the transformation serum, and escaped. They also learned of a 4th of July party that Claude had organised in the same venue as last time. Andy sneaked into the party and tried to warn the American guests about the upcoming life threat, but they just booed him.
Listen to me! No! Skinheads are playing!
Meanwhile, the police also entered the party and arrested Andy. As Claude and his people started injecting themselves with the serum, they transformed into werewolves and started their rampage. Somehow, Serafini managed to break through the main door, as the guests, including Chris, tied to a cross, managed to flee and save their lives. Andy and Serafini killed many werewolves, one of which had killed Brad, whose soul was finally freed from the curse. As Andy shot another werewolf, to his horror, he found it to be Serafini, who took a shot of the serum to fight other werewolves. She was severely wounded and pleaded with Andy to kill her and relieve her from the pain. Andy was about to kill her when the police arrived, and as Andy escaped, Serafini was taken in the ambulance. The ambulance technician administered adrenaline, which saved her. Andy stumbled on his way and crashed onto the subway tracks, followed by a werewolf. Soon, a train stopped, the werewolf entered the train and attacked the passengers. As the effect of the serum ended, this werewolf was found to be Claude. As he tried to inject another dose, Andy attacked him, and the duo was engaged in a fierce fight. As Andy accidentally fell on the syringe with the serum, he transformed into a werewolf once again and killed Claude while he learned it was Claude who had bitten him. So he killed Claude, ate his heart, and broke the curse. A few full moons later, Andy and Serafini were seen getting married at the top of the Statue of Liberty, in the presence of Chris. And as the ring fell from the top, the bride and groom bungee jumped. As Andy grabbed the ring, they got married in the air. Polygram Pictures approached John Landis for a sequel of An American Werewolf in London, but the studio was absolutely not interested in his script. Later, Tim Burns and Tom Stern were hired for the screenplay, while Storm was supposed to direct the film. But once they liked the script and decided to increase the budget, Anthony Weller was introduced to the project, who rewrote the script and also directed the movie, though the final screenplay credit was given to Tim Burns, Tom Stern, and Anthony Weller. The film, like its predecessor, tried to take the same road through comedy and horror. But here's the difference between CGI and practical effects, my friends. The effects of the computer were highly disappointing compared to the efforts of Rick Baker. There are a few laughs and a few gory moments, and the film had developed a cult following but failed to impose the impact of the original movie. An American Werewolf in Paris is a fun watch with an exciting storyline, if it's not compared with its prequel. Tom Everett Scott as Andy remembered that he was pretty embarrassed running around in his underwear, while Julie Delpy as Serafini now admits that she took the role only to pay her rent, but she hated the experience very much and kept herself away from commercial movies in the future. Is there going to be another American Werewolf? The creator of The Walking Dead and Outcast, Robert Kirkman, had shown interest in the reboot of John Landis' classic film An American Werewolf in London, which had been written by none other than John Landis' son, Max Landis, but unfortunately the project didn't seem to mature and faded away. On another note, writer, director and producer Hunter C. Williams had been keen on another franchise titled An American Werewolf in Rome. As expressed, the film will be a tribute to the classic 1981 film, while offering its own unique spin on the subgenre. Williams intends to glorify the epic history of Rome. At the same time, he expects to present another werewolf film to the dedicated American Werewolf fan club that would successfully combine horror and comedy. Let us wait and watch how close it gets to John Landis and Rick Baker's version. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks!